Ladies and gentlemen, we are less than 24 hours away from our first live game action of this Philadelphia Phillies. But unfortunately, the topic of today does have to do with an injury issue that has popped up within this Phillies team, with Weston Wilson battling seemingly a little bit of a knock coming out of spring training. I'm going to break down how this directly impacts Weston Wilson. Do feel really bad from the guy on a human being level, and how it impacts this Phillies team, that he was very clearly the guy seemingly in the front runner for that final roster spot as a utility guy and off the bench type of role for this Phillies team. We saw a little bit of what he could bring to the table last season. Let's not forget this man hit for the cycle in a Phillies uniform just last year and did kind of provide a pretty reliable off the bench bat for this team for stretches there. So do want to break down how this all comes together as well as everything else pertaining to this Phillies team. But before I get fully into it, do want to remind you guys, make sure you are smashing that subscribe button. That at this point in time, 72.7% of you guys tuning into these videos have not subscribed to us here on Phillies Digest just yet. We got a lot to break down as the season is finally getting underway and we have some real news to get into. So excited to be a part of the journey from start to finish the season and want as many of you as possible along for the ride. So to get into the topic of today, do want to dive into what we know at this current point. We have this from Destiny Luzardo here, who writes, Weston Wilson was one of the position players the Phillies intended to take to Lakeland on Saturday for their first spring training game against the Tigers, but the utility man, quote, felt a grab in his oblique while in the batting cage Friday morning, according to manager Rob Thomson. There was no immediate word on the severity of the injury, but it could cost the 30-year-old Wilson time as he battles to make his first opening day roster of his career. Wilson is in competition with Cody Clemens, Cal Stevenson, and Buddy Kennedy for the Phillies' final bench spot. He appeared early on to have the inside track because he can play both infield corners, both outfield corners, and hits right-handed. Quote, we think Wes Wilson gets sort of swept to the side. He's done a nice job for us when he's had the opportunity, President of Baseball Operations Dave Dombrowski said last week. And that is one of probably the things that I want to harp on the most, is it does feel, getting a sense from just reading the quotes and seeing the clips of him actually talking about it, that there's a little bit of belief from Dave Dombrowski in Weston Wilson. And that's obviously incredibly important when talking about the general manager, the President of Baseball Operations, who has such a clear voice within the franchise, that if he believes, you're going to get a little bit of a longer leash for opportunities. And to be fair to Weston Wilson, I do think he's earned that right. Now, granted, it's not going to all show up in the stat sheet to look at what he produced just last season, that he only had 88 total at-bats at the major league level. As was mentioned, he is 30 years old, that he's not the spring chicken or up-and-coming, rising star here. He is who he is at this point, but what I believe that is a very functional Major League Baseball player. He had 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, as I mentioned, did hit for a cycle. Getting 25 hits in those 88 at-bats is pretty impressive there, and it is nice the flexibility that he brings, both at the plate and in the field. That the fact that he can play the outfield and the infield, I think gives him a significant leg up on a lot of these utility guys. We've seen a bit of the Cal Stevensons, of the Cody Clemens, of the Buddy Kennedys, and I honestly like all these guys a little bit, so I don't want to put any of them down. Cody Clemens, to me, for this specific situation, is the clear fix, that I think that ultimately will be the guy that gets locked into that final roster spot. But I do want to reflect on kind of a human being level, what a bummer this is for Weston Wilson, that this is a dude who has, earned his opportunity, that he has more than paid his dues, and this felt like the chance that it was really here for him to take. And as I mentioned, there does feel to be a little bit of a belief in him. And to kind of reflect on that a little, we have this headline here saying, first injury to hit Philly spring training could have big roster ramifications. Shout out to Michael Fisher for writing this up. And what he says in his story here is he starts off saying the severity of the injury wasn't known at the time, but oblique injuries can be tough to come back from quickly. Even a mild strain will set Wilson back with games about to get underway. The 30-year-old utility player came into camp looking to win one of the final roster spots on the opening day roster. And the headline, spring training injury to Weston Wilson could have opening day roster ramifications for the Phillies. He continues to write, presumed to be the frontrunner before everyone even showed up to camp in mid-February, Wilson is up against Cody Clemens and Buddy Kennedy as his biggest competition. If an injury forced him to miss much time over the next month, it could cost him a spot on the 26-man roster when the Phillies head north to begin the regular season. And to continue on for a little bit of this praise from Dave Dombrowski here, did want to highlight this exact quote in which it says here, now, Wilson's versatility might not even be a factor in the team's final roster decision. If he's sidelined for too long or ends up having to begin the season on the 10-day IL, it leaves an opening for Clemens or Kennedy, both out of options, to get a chance in the big leagues to begin the year. In his limited time with the Phillies, Wilson has been productive. He played in 41 games last year, hitting .284 with an .836 OPS in 98 plate appearances. He hit 3 home runs, drove in 10, scored 13 runs, and added 3 stolen bases. He also collected the 10th cycle vehicle in Phillies history. And the final update that I did want to have here is the Phillies appeared high on Wilson last week. During his first press conference of the spring training, President of Baseball Operations Dave Dombrowski dropped a big hint that Wilson had an inside track for the final bench spot. Quote, "We think Weston Wilson sort of gets swept to the side," Dombrowski said. "He's done a nice job for us when we've given him the opportunity, and he can play the infield and outfield. Being the most versatile of the top contenders gives Wilson an edge despite having a minor league option remaining." Quote, "That person who'd be out there in the final spot if Rojas makes the team would also need to be able to play the infield," Dombrowski said. So a pretty clear hint that Wilson would have been the guy if all things were equal, but unfortunately, that is not how life works, and clearly all things are not equal in this situation. So we don't have any specifics as far as how long this injury could potentially keep him out. Oblique is a pretty vague term for what specifically he's dealing with, but the thing that I will note for baseball players, that is not an injury that you don't want to deal with. Just think about the motions of hitting at the plate and how much torque that takes within your body, that sort of turn motion. That is a lot of oblique action that is in there, so certainly not what you want to be dealing with, particularly this early on in the year. These are things that, depending on the severity, guys will battle through for stretches of the season, but the fact that we haven't even got to like the real show whatsoever, still in the early parts of spring training, and obviously him earning that opportunity, it's a tough spot to be in for Weston Wilson individually. And again, as I mentioned, I do have a lot of sympathy for him in the spot here, that this felt like his chance, that this specific spring training felt like the opportunity for Weston Wilson to kind of cement his place as a major leaguer, and that may be taken away with him depending on how this injury ultimately shakes out. Now, on the other side of the coin, there's always guys that benefit from others' misfortune here, and in this specific spot, I do think it is Cody Clemens, that we've seen some nice signs from him. But I do think with Wilson overall, just the additional flexibility and the fact of him being a right-handed bat is a huge asset for this Phillies team. So it will be interesting to see how they juggle this overall. I wouldn't have any sort of high expectations for these first signs of action that we have. It's going to be a lot of trial runs, Rob Thomson giving guys opportunities to earn their chance, and once again, Weston Wilson is not going to be in that mix there. So we'll be very curious to see what the official timeline is on this, how long he is kept out. I do hope that he's back on the field in the short term and has a chance to really earn his spot the right way, because I think that's how everyone wants it to go down and how it should be in the overall. But those options are something to keep in mind moving forward. So I don't want to get into any significant conclusions until we have sort of a timeline or hear Rob Thomson speak a little bit more openly on it, but not what you want to see from Weston Wilson. And I do think the effects of this is, if he cannot be on the field to start the season, pretty clearly going to be Cody Clemens with this last spot on this Phillies major league team. So ultimately, the bottom line and the thing that I'm going to rest positively on is we have baseball right around the corner. These are the decisions we're talking about. We don't have to make up and go into the contract details, or could they add this player? Could they trade Alec Bohm? We have real baseball taking place on the diamond. So very excited to get into that and see our first sign of action tomorrow. Very excited for each and every one of you guys to be a part of our journey right here on on Phillies Digest this season. Much more happy to be talking about the Phillies than the Sixers these days. So hope each and every one of you would join me, and make sure that you are smashing that subscribe button if you have not just yet. So once again, that is just 27.3% of you guys tuning in have subscribed thus far. Let's get these numbers popping. Let's grow this Phillies Digest family. And once again, me and Luke Arcani want each and every one of you guys a part of this from start to finish. So appreciate you tuning into this video here, and talk with you next time right here on Phillies Digest. Peace.